Greetings and salutations, everyone! I would like to share something with all of you. Mainly my experience of playing Rogue class in last Epoch, as well as talk about the future of this game from my personal point of view. One thing that I'm going to tell straight up front is that this is just my random thoughts and feelings that I got from doing a full playthrough with this class, which I'm trying to formulate in a coherent video. This is not a step-by-step guide with detailed description of each ability and how to do various stuff, even though I will include my quote-unquote build with precise skill points allocation, items and stats in the conclusion. With that said, I, Alexander, also known as Sandreyevitz, am presenting a new video named Bladedancer Rogue, my impressions and some thoughts about the future of last Epoch. This video will cover the following aspects: my initial expectations and first impressions of Rogue Bladedancer, subjectively good and subjectively bad things, objectively good and objectively bad things, conclusion with quote-unquote build overview, and my predictions of the future of this game. First things first, let's talk about my personal expectations which I had when I saw a teaser of this character with some tidbits of gameplay elements. I should mention it right now, I was mostly interested in a melee aspect with the addition of dual wield mechanic of this game. This is why I'm not going to quote-unquote analyze in depth range mechanic of this class, because I'm not a fan of range shooters in action RPG games. Instead, I will try to describe my thoughts about dual-wield melee subclass Bladedancer. From the gameplay footage, I was immediately impressed with his mobility, which is one of those features that I find to be objectively great, but more on that later. I was expecting to have something along the lines of point-and-click dashing, teleportation, and great movement speed boosting abilities. Something similar to a Nightblade class from Grim Dawn. On the same note, when it comes to offensive choices, I assumed that a rogue class will have an equivalent to weapon pool skills mechanic in Grim Dawn, which could be described as a pool of skills that trigger from weapon attacks and adds bonuses and special effects to those attacks. Considering the vast amount of tools and options that each skill in last Epoch has in its tree, that could have been great. Finally, when it comes to defense, I was expecting to have a good mixture between protective skills on which I can rely on consistently, like a defensive buff or a passive ability, and something that I can activate in dangerous situations, a panic button. After a new patch has been downloaded and I have invested more than a dozen hours in this class, I was ready to formulate my first impressions. Some of my initial expectations were not only confirmed but also exceeded my early predictions. For instance, such aspects as mobility, critical chance and critical damage, attack speed, and plethora of resistance reduction sources turn out to be incredibly strong, both during leveling process and in the endgame. Sadly, there was no equivalent to a weapon pool skill mechanic from Grim Dawn. You can only choose one offensive ability that will replace your default auto-attack. The lack of a consistent defensive options in skills and passives, which works 100% of the time both in Rogue basic tree and Bladedancer subclass, was not really a problem during my leveling process. However, things have changed in the monolith, which I'm going to elaborate on later. All in all, I have quickly managed to complete the campaign of last Epoch with this Rogue Bladedancer class. Afterwards, I went straight into the monolith. During my time in monolith and after completing it, I had started to realize what I liked and disliked about this class. For the sake of making things short, I shall name only a couple of subjectively good and bad things in my personal opinion. I'm going to start with subjectively good things, and the first one on the list will be the fact that most of the skills on this class scales from dexterity. This allows the player to not worry that much about gathering other stats, if he wishes to improve his abilities. Some people may think that this is also a bad idea to design this aspect in such a way, because it limits a creative approach and forces you to go for one attribute most of the time. However, I can only partially agree with this scenario, because there is a counter-argument to it. Let's say that a person likes how Poison Flask works and he has most of his gear, enchantments and idols focused around dexterity attribute. But the catch could be the fact that Poison Flask may simply scale from intelligence. Now, for an experienced player who have invested countless hours into this game, it's not a problem. Chances are he has tons of resources to switch from one attribute to another. For a newbie, this is a completely different story. Sure, this limits the variety aspect, but it makes other things easier to maintain and balance. Another subjectively good aspect is the overwhelming amount of resistance reduction sources, for example, Frailty. I do not think that other classes in Last Epoch have the same number of debuffs that Rogue has. Counter-argument for this might be that once you have all the necessary gear for a build, you do not need so many resistance reduction sources anymore. However, that is only relevant when you have a fully geared up character, or you already have some equipment waiting for you at a certain level threshold. Before this moment, everything can and will drastically improve your damage, especially those skills which lowers enemy resistances to your damage type. From subjectively good things to subjectively bad ones. From my personal point of view, I did not like those passive abilities in Bladedancer skill tree, which works only when you are at full health. Granted, you may have an insane improvement to your damage and defense when you are not taking any hits. However, in most of the situations it's easier said than done, especially if you are playing a melee archetype like in my case. Sure, you can lure enemies away with training dummy or kite them by using hit and run method. It's also possible to regenerate your health relatively fast with Rogue class. But there are tons of scenarios when you can get hit by something as little as a small projectile, which you will barely notice on the battlefield, only to lose those benefits from these passives. It's not the first time when I see those kind of abilities, and most people basically try to avoid it, because of their quote-unquote beginner's trap aspect. Considering what type of game Last Epoch is and how much stuff flying in your direction in the monolith, I personally think that it's a complete waste of time to use those abilities, if you wish to have a consistent effectiveness with your class and not just rely on gimmicks. Another subjectively bad thing is the fact that compared to some other classes, you have a limited number of defensive options with 100% uptime that can significantly boost your defense. Don't get me wrong, Rogue class by itself and combined with Bladedancer has good number of active skills that will protect you in battle. But the problem is that you need to time them appropriately. Again, certain archetypes can get away with this aspect way easier than others, like little Mirage builds. However, in my case, it was an uphill battle each time my smoke bomb or target dummy were vanishing. I guess I simply got used to playing a Sentinel class and having tons of consistent defensive options, like 100% critical strike avoidance. The counter-argument to this would be to simply get used to this quote-unquote riskier playstyle, and I can partially agree with this. After all, it's just a matter of personal taste. Switching things up a bit, it's time to elaborate on things which are objectively good with this class. Number 1, the mobility aspect. Currently, this is one of the well-defined, consistent and strongest traits upon which you can rely on in every possible situation and with any build that exists on the web. This trait is pretty flexible and it allows anyone to rush through a pack of monsters, teleport or dash to a certain spot on the ground, fast run through the maps in the monolith, etc. It does not matter which build you are going to end up with, speed and mobility factor will always allow you to gain a slight edge over slower characters. I liked it a lot, and in my opinion this feature has been done in a better way compared to Grim Dawn. Number 2, this class easily gets good value of critical strike chance, critical strike multiplier, mostly via Rogue and Bladedancer passives. I should say that for builds that rely on how hard you can hit your enemy by your attacks, not damage over time builds, having a relatively high critical strike chance and critical strike multiplier is a must. In some instances, you have to get it by going for certain passives in your spec skill tree, having it on idols or items, thus sacrificing some space from your suffixes and prefixes setups. I have done it with my Sentinel Paladin on Rive skill. However, in the case of a rogue class, it is no longer an issue. You can use this space to improve any other characteristics that you want. This opens up many options which I quite like. Let's talk about some negatives, which to my surprise can be attributed only towards subjective ones. Firstly, hitbox issues when using any version of Flurry on a rogue class. This is something which is so infuriating that it might frustrate you to the point of not using it at all. You see, Flurry by itself, without taking any modifiers for extending its range, has a weird glitch. If an enemy stands too close to you, your attacks will miss. This happens when your character is trying to hit someone with this skill. He strikes with a weapon in front of him in an arc, or shoots 3 arrows in a line consecutively. However, there is no hitbox between the position of your character and the placement of your damaging zone. If an enemy steps too close, you will simply not attack him at all. Extending a range on this skill, with the help of adding force wave attacks on it, partially helps, but the same issue remains. Should you let some enemies, especially little ones, get as close to you as possible, you will not be able to hit them. You would have to reposition your character to another spot on the map and try it again. Sounds similar to a force wave problem that exists even nowadays in Grim Dawn. Even with that, I'm still considering it as an objectively bad thing.
Second thing which is objectively bad with rogue class is the same hitbox problems, but on the volley skill. Especially when using Giant Slayer modifier. That same modifier that allows you to shoot enemies with more than 1 arrows from the multi-shot ability. Sometimes, when you shoot the monsters, your arrows are simply passing through them, thus not allowing you to kill them effectively and quickly. In one instance, you can be standing point blank to the target and shooting him, and all arrows will going to connect, and 2-3 shots afterwards, half of your arrows will start to just passing by, not hitting the same target. Why? Who knows? Is this something that was so hard to notice? I don't know.
Anyway, it's time to wrap things up, so let's move on to some final thoughts, where I will share my opinion on what needs to be improved first and foremost. Also, what I wish them to focus on in the future. The primary goal, which needs an improvement, is periodical performance issues, which you will encounter in some maps inside Monolith. They are not consistent, but once they start happening, it can ruin your run through the maps and kill a character easily, even if you have a well-equipped hero. Having good PC specs does not help, and switching your settings does not do anything. To put it simply, you cannot fight a huge pack of monsters while having less than 10 FPS. The funny thing is that smaller monsters make lag factor even worse. Sure, if an object on a map is to destroy some boss or obelisk and towers, it's one thing. But if you need to cleanse the forge, when you are chased by huge enemy hordes and it starts lagging, that is where you start to lose it. This may also negatively impact your goal of running faster through those maps. I simply don't understand these performance problems, and why it is happening so often in solo mode. Can you even imagine what chaos it will be once they will add a multiplayer component in this game? I hope it will be resolved in the future. One of those things that I wish to have in the future is the trading system, where each of us can buy and sell every possible piece of equipment and components. This has to be done mostly out of necessity, because now crafting best-in-slot items, where you are maxing out all prefixes and suffixes, is almost impossible by conventional means. On top of that, it drains your resources insanely fast, and some of them you can only get by farming. In my opinion, this would definitely help all players, and it will allow everyone to have a consistent alternative for upgrading your character to the maximum and not rely on crafting system that much. I also don't like this whole idea of realizing that a base ability has some weird interactions or bugs, which will not allow you to use it effectively. Look, I get it, Last Epoch does not have a huge team of developers. Something may easily slip through their internal testings. However, nobody pushes them to rush a new patch with content update or balancing stuff. I would rather wait some extra weeks or months to test fully functional base abilities, then figure out later that a crucial part of your base skill does not work as intended. This approach needs an improvement. Finally, I would love to see an expansion to the monolith, as well as a redesign of an empowered timeline. I personally believe that the monolith should be their main selling point for this game, and it will attract new players in the future. After all, this is something that brought me in Last Epoch, and I like this game mode a lot. But this mode can and should definitely be improved. New timelines with new items, new bosses with new mechanics, a genuine hard mode in an empowered timeline where your bosses have new phases and the ability to get unique and powerful legendaries, etc. I talked about it in my other videos, but this mode can become a raid version of an MMORPG, with adding some secret bosses at the end, which could only be defeated by the strongest players. The possibilities are endless here. I just hope that one day, at least most of my expectations and predictions will become true, so that I can enjoy this game even more than before. With that said, I would like to thank everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, share with your friends, as well as subscribe to our MightyBrosky YouTube channel. Additionally, you can also follow us on social media, visit our Twitch channel where we stream various different games, support us on Patreon, and receive various different bonuses. All the links are provided in the description. See you all in the next video.